Tom Rinaldi, reunited under a different acronym here. You and I talking together as members of Fox. I'm so glad to see you. I'm a fan of you personally, and I'm a fan of you professionally. And I'm glad to have you on the Will Cain podcast.
Well, you know how the feeling is mutual, Will. I can still remember a conversation we had up in central Connecticut a number of years ago. I think it was really the first time we'd had a chance to talk in person and to see what you've built and the audience you've developed, the career that you're forging from that conversation to now. It's remarkable. So it's great to be with you, man, and congrats on everything.
Well, I will say this in response to that, and I think this is not simply a mutual admiration society. I like to say things that might be useful to the audience. But, Tom, I'm not into gratuitous compliments, either giving or receiving gratuitous compliments. I always tell this story. I lived in New York for like 15 years, and I had an absolutely gorgeous Doberman Pinscher. And I think I can say that objectively. And people would say that in Central Park. Before 9 a.m., Central Park is leash-free, and it's just a dog world. And I couldn't return the compliment unless the other person's dog was also good-looking. I just couldn't give the gratuitous compliment. And so I don't think you should go through life looking to be liked. However, you should go through life hoping to earn the respect of those you respect. So when you pulled me over there in Bristol and gave me compliments on then the Will Cain Show on ESPN Radio, it meant a lot to me because you already had my respect, and it was more, I hope, than a gratuitous compliment. So the point being, that was of great meaning and value, and I appreciate it to this day, as I appreciate your work, Tom Rinaldi. Let's talk about our work together. We're both headed to Dyersville, Iowa. We're both headed to the second installment of the Major League Baseball's Field of Dreams game. It's this year, the Reds and the Cubs. And Tom, I got to tell you, man, people have asked me about this, and I do, and you do, get to do a lot of really cool things in sports. This one lives up to the hype.
It does, and frankly, Will, Major League Baseball scored such a huge win for the sport overall. The bar is set so high, it will be difficult to match that, I think, objectively. From the players emerging from the corn to Costner's appearance, the incredible, I know I'm going to sound like a shill here, Will, but the incredible job done by Pete Macheska and the director in the truck, which won the Emmy for Best Sporting Event against events like the Super Bowl, etc. It just was a magical night. And then to see it end in a walk-off by Tim Anderson, it was just an incredible, incredible night. You know, the teams that are coming, we're obviously excited to have the opportunity to broadcast again. The teams, the standings, all those things kind of melt away. I think you probably felt that as well, Will, just in the magic of this tiny stadium built in the cornfield.
Yeah, I think the only risk is what you said, is living up to the high bar set in the first installment between the Yankees and the White Sox. You know, I don't know what your takeaway is, Tom, but I was surprised, by the way. And so life is often about expectations. Set them low and you're guaranteed for success. I didn't go into it with huge expectations. I mean, I'm a fan of the movie. I love the movie Field of Dreams. But my takeaway is, you know, sports has become such a massive spectacle. Everything is on a grand scale, that what was really appealing last year about Field of Dreams is to take a massive spectacle, nothing bigger than the New York Yankees, and then surgically implant it into an environment that is quaint. You know, the stadium is small. It is cut out of a cornfield. And I walked away from it thinking other sports, and I've said this on air, Tom, but other sports should look back to their roots and at least once a year scale it down and back to the essence of what is that sport. I don't know if that's Daytona running on the beach, you know, NASCAR running the Daytona 500 back on the beach like it was so long ago. I don't know if it's football returning, put the Cowboys and the Texans playing, you know, in Odessa, Texas under the Friday night lights. But I do think there was something about this that takes it back to the essence of sports.
I do. I think baseball understood that, Will, and I think they executed on it. You frame it well. They placed it in a quote-unquote quaint setting, but let's not forget, Will, that setting had a massive following and aura around it because of the great success of the movie. not in terms of box office, but in terms of how it grew to be generationally passed down and adored. It's a keepsake of a film for people who are casual to avid fans. Look at the NHL. They seem to have struck it correctly here, where they play those games outside. They still play them in huge venues, in stadiums, but they're great spectacles and events when the NHL plays the outdoor games on the rink. The NFL, I think that'd be a pretty big ask to try to take it. They're obviously trying to expand the Shield in Europe and in Mexico and different parts of this continent and across the pond as well. But there's just something about baseball tied to that movie that MLB and Fox, I think, captured beautifully a year ago, and we hope to capture again.
Hey, Tom, we have a mutual colleague who I think we both respect greatly, back when we were together at ESPN, Andy Tennant. And I remember a lesson that Andy taught me, and I've shared it with my audience, that audiences, whether or not it's conscious or subconscious, like stories about villains more than they like stories about heroes. They want to hear about Draymond Green, not Steph Curry. They want to hear about Darth Vader, not Luke Skywalker. And I think he's right. And I think he's been validated in that observation about storytelling. Why do you think, from a storyteller, a master storyteller, which you are, why do you think baseball works so well in ways that other sports do not when it comes to movies?
I do think that Andy is correct. Happy birthday to him. He just celebrated his 50th. He had a huge surprise party in Connecticut. He's just a genius storyteller himself. I think baseball works on a number of ways, Will, in terms of lending itself to movies. But to go to the villain, go to, let's say, a movie like The Natural, where there really is a villain, right? The villain is sort of big business itself, if you will, or cynicism in the world, if you will, where, Roy Hobbs is cast as that pure natural talent, and how will he muster against the cruel, harsh machine of the world? And I just think that works beautifully. But if you look at villains, we sometimes will, in sport, make villains of our legends. We like them to be great up to a point, and then we like to see them fall, because what we love more than villain and more than hero is redemption story. The only two things we like more than the winner and the villain, I think, are the underdog and those who are redeemed. I think sometimes we knock the great off the pedestal in the hopes that the great will return. And I think baseball, we've seen that happen across all sports. Certainly, you can look at some of the greatest athletes of all time who have had that cycle. Well, it's just part of what we love about sport. It's such a natural venue for narrative, right? So much of the news, Will, that we discuss, unfortunately, doesn't seem to be a record of accomplishment very much. Sport remains that. You can assign whatever meaning and value you want to the fact that, what does it mean that you beat a person across the net from you and you win Wimbledon? Well, you join in a long line in history at an event that's been played for well over a century. Is there meaning or value in that? We have assigned that. People have agreed with that. And that lends itself to narrative. That's just part of what's great about sport.
Hey, what do you think's the best example as you talk about that redemptive arc and really how one character can trade between the role of hero and villain throughout his career? I think of Jordan. I think of Brady. What do you think is the best example in the world of sports of that narrative arc?
There are countless examples, but just to pick one, and I wouldn't necessarily say villain, but I would say someone who's had not one but several falls, and that would be Tiger. Well, Tiger, who has been the most, transcendent generational talent, doesn't cover Tiger Woods. It doesn't begin to describe what he has done for his sport, what he did in terms of being, at one point, I'd say, well, inarguably one of the 10 most famous people on the face of the earth. And then to see the different times when he has fallen from that perch, whether it be, we're all familiar with what those episodes are, But Will, I'll ask you this. I can't begin to tell you the number of people who reached out to me and said how emotional they were when he won the Masters in 2019, that they were deeply moved by that. Why? Why do you think well, I don't know if you were, Will, but why do you think people were moved that way?
Okay, so the answer for me is, and I don't think I've fully ever sounded it out to myself, but the answer has to be what you just described. So we'll keep sharing stories with each other. Before I was at ESPN, I was at CNN for several years, and I did a show with Eliot Spitzer, the former governor of New York. And here's something he told me in his office one time that I'll never forget. He said, Will, you don't ever want 100% approval rating, because 100% approval rating is the same thing as a 0% approval rating. That pendulum swings too obviously and too quickly. In other words, what he was describing was you want not just those that love, but you want those that hate. Now, I don't think you go through life trying to calculate or troll your way into haters. But if you are being authentic and not trying to placate everyone, you will inevitably just end up in that situation. And so I think about that with Tiger. I don't know that I ever thought of him, Tom, as a villain. I also don't think that I ever thought of him personally as a hero. But the redemptive story that you just described sucked me in. And there was one particular moment that did, and I'll be real, it did bring, misty eyes. And that was when he hugged his son, Charlie. And that was it for me. And
why?
I'll tell you.
Why that moment?
Okay, Will? I'll tell you both introspectively and then more in this sort of, attempt to abstractly define storytelling. The abstract part of it is the parallel with his father. It's Earl to Tiger, Tiger to Charlie. That has a clear pull on people. And then the more personal side of it, I know this about myself, okay? And I don't talk about it, and I'm not going to talk about it in depth here as we sit here together today. But I know for me, father-son stories, they go straight to the heart. That's the bottom line, okay? And that says something about my relationship with my father, and it says something about my relationship with my sons. And I will tell you, I love my wife dearly. There is no rom-com that has ever made me cry. There is no Notebook that has ever pulled tears out of my eyes. But there's something about the father-son story that hits my heart.
Which takes us back to Field of Dreams, Will, right? In so many ways, that father-son story which casts itself in baseball. I think you make a great point. Did people see Tiger as the villain? Did they see him as the hero? As well as the Spitzer point, right? It goes back to the Oscar Wilde quote. There's only one thing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about. That no matter what, you just don't want to be ignored. And Tiger is such a force, right, that there's no way he'll be ignored. Even right now, in this moment with LIV Golf, Will, he dominated the headlines without making a comment when the number $700 to $800 million was floated as the offer that LIV made to try to have him come over and, in some essence, right, join them and turn ranks, if you will, switch ranks, which he didn't do. I think it's all part of sport where these narratives compel us because of how they apply to us, how they have a universal sensibility to them, how we can apply them to our own lives.
Tom, I want to pursue curiosity where it takes me, and you can always, as any guest that talks with me, you can always abstain, but I will always ask. And you open the door on this. So you're a smart thinker, Tom, so I'm genuinely curious about where you are. And you're also not overtly political, and somehow this issue has become political. I'm curious about where you are on LIV because, I think there is enough hypocrisy, including my own, to go around in everyone's opinion of LIV. Here's what I mean. I have criticism for Lebron James making money with the Chinese Communist Party while criticizing the United States of America. At the same time, do I therefore obligate myself to having criticism of Greg Norman or Brooks Koepka or Bryson DeChambeau for taking money from the Saudi government in a clear attempt, and I think it's a clear attempt, at sports washing, creating the public image of of Saudi Arabia through sports. I don't know if I'm hypocritical, but I also find that others who have such criticism for the golfers that join LIV are pretty silent when it comes to China. I don't know how we find a through line, and I don't know how we criticize guys when this much money is being laid on the table. I don't know how we find a through line, Tom, but I know that you're a person of insight when it comes to stories like LIV.
I'd say I'd just make these 2 points, Will. The first is that, and in no way does this validate anyone's position or invalidate anyone's position, but every institution, and I use that in the broadest sense, Will, every institution, no institution is pure. It isn't. That's the reality in life. No matter how pure one's intent is, in the execution, there's always going to be flaw, and we can always find moral flaw. Again, that's the realm we live in. So that's one point. The second point is, I think that the fascinating dynamic here, Will, between the PGA Tour and LIV Golf, not to get too deep in the weeds, revolves around an existential issue for the PGA Tour. And this is no revelation. People who cover the sport, I've covered the sport, are certainly well aware of this. And it compares to tennis well. The most prestigious events in the sport are not controlled by the tour itself. The Masters, controlled by Augusta. The Open Championship, controlled by the R&A. And we listen, the PGA Championship, I understand. The U.S. Open, controlled by the USGA. And the ranking points and the different ways that players are able to qualify for those events. Well, if I were to say to you, you would be guaranteed this money to play in these quote-unquote lesser or less historically valued events, and you could still play in the crown jewel events of your sport, you could still write your name into history, if that doesn't sound too bloated, if you could still have your name etched in silver on the most meaningful trophies in the sport, that's a real existential challenge for the PGA Tour. And whether that comes down to ranking points, whether that comes down to the way players qualify for these events, that's a real challenge. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out beyond court action, which we're now seeing, inevitably unfold between LIV and the PGA Tour.
So I'm going to take you back to storytelling now. Again, pursuing my curiosity, I brought him up, LeBron James. We talked about that story arc, that redemptive arc of other great superstars, Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, Tom Brady. Do you think LeBron seems unique in the world of sports, Tom? Unless you disagree with me, he definitely has the redemptive story of winning a championship when he goes back home to Cleveland. And he definitely has the villain turn when he chooses to join a super team in Miami. But there's something about LeBron's story that is different. And in my estimation, Tom, in a flatter way. It seems in many ways, Tom, we're talking about our reaction to a superstar, not so much who the superstar is himself. Our reaction to LeBron seems two-dimensional. I mean, he's definitely loved and hated, but I don't know. It doesn't seem to have that rich story arc that we have with so many other big characters in sports. Do you disagree?
I do. Well, I think he's got an incredible, rich and deep story. I really do. I think he is a towering figure in sport. I understand he is incredibly polarizing, but I mean, this is just for me here, Will. I think he is an awesome figure in the landscape of sport in so many ways. In the things that he has earned on the court, in becoming one of the all-time greats in the sport, in his origin story, Will, which is astounding.
No doubt.
In what he's done in creating the school in Ohio, which is incredible, in what he's done in now building what seems mind-blowingly like an actual achievable path to playing with one of his children in the NBA. I mean, it goes on and on. I find him an awesome figure in sport. I do. And I've only had the opportunity to talk to LeBron but a handful of times. I don't think he could pick me out of a lineup, but I do. I find him an incredible figure.
I hope you tell the story, because I don't know. I know there's something inside of me.
I thought it was so interesting, Will. Pardon me. I thought it was so interesting that you use this term. This is why I find you compelling to listen to, Will, the term flat.
Yeah.
I think that's such an interesting term. And I see LeBron as the opposite. I see him as really, really deep. In terms of his story, and his narrative has great depth to me.
Okay, so I hope you tell the story, because in all seriousness, as I listen to you, it's probably my opinion that LeBron is flat should not reflect on him, but should reflect on me. It should serve as a criticism of me.
But it always does. Will.
Yeah.
But it always does, Will. That's what's great about the icons. That's what's great, Will, about a star. I read this wonderful line by Brendan Quinn, who is a sensational writer for The Athletic, covered college basketball, now covers golf. He's just phenomenal. And he captured this idea with such economy, Will, about Rory. I think Rory is just fascinating and astounding. And the thing that Brendan Quinn said was the world knows him because he allows the world to know him. And in that allowance, Will, the individual yields a collective reaction. Because you feel like you know him, his win feels like your win. His loss feels like your loss, because he in our perception, has allowed you in.
So,
and I'm talking about, Rory is amazing. Well, and again, I've been fortunate to get to know some of these guys to different degrees. Again, I always use this line, Will, I'm not going whitewater rafting with Rory next weekend. I get it. But, I've gotten to know him to a degree, and other athletes to better degrees, others to certainly much lesser. But I think it's that notion where the individual somehow becomes the collective. That's part of the alchemy of sports and fandom.
And I'm sure that my reaction to LeBron is not just about me, but it's a great many of us. I think there are many people like myself who have developed this flat perception of LeBron. Look, I'm going to try to sound this out in real time. I'm not even sure where these thoughts go. I think what it is, Tom, is this. You are 100% right about the plot of the story of LeBron James, his background and where he comes from, what he has overcome, even his professional choices provide a story arc that is an interesting plot. But I feel like the character of LeBron has been made two-dimensional, either by himself or by America. And it's because of this. Maybe it is because he's polarizing. You mentioned Rory. Okay, Rory is complex. Jordan is complex as a character, as a personality. Brady is incredibly complex. I would love to hear a story about Novak Djokovic because I find him complex. Here's a villain that I used to roll my eyes at that now I'm like, I would sign up for a documentary on Aaron Rodgers in a heartbeat. I want to know what makes Aaron Rodgers tick. But for LeBron James, not the plot, but the character, I feel like my eyes roll. Here we go. He's going to say something. It's predictable. It's uncomplicated. And I guess he has become, and again, I'm not going to lay it all on LeBron. It's a reflection of us as well, two-dimensional and predictable in a way that I'm not sure, Tom, I'm ready to sign up for the same 6-part series that I did with Michael Jordan and loved. I have to admit, I didn't watch the Tom Brady Facebook story and installment, but I find him interesting. What makes him tick? And like I said, I can think of so many other characters. I guess I need more on the actual character of LeBron James.
just a lot there, Will. But again, I think you said it beautifully. It speaks to how it's a reflection of us and our lens, perhaps much more than it is who we're looking at through the lens. And again, listen, I'm not so naive as to think that image isn't important and that athletes now, certainly LeBron is able to control access to his story. He's able to tell his story on platforms that he controls and owns. But and he's earned that. Nobody handed him that. Nobody's handed him anything. I mean, again, I think his origin story, and you can point to in so many ways, Will, in so many venues of American life when it comes to achievement, that's what's so inspiring, I think, in human narrative, that you can point to so many great achievers and their origin stories being absolutely fascinating and utterly improbable. And I think LeBron's is one of those.
Okay, let's return back to baseball and Field of Dreams. I'm going to ask you just some Tom Rinaldi opinions here. What is the best baseball movie?
I would probably say, and I'm going to sound ancient when I say this, I would probably say Bang the Drum Slowly, which is a, do you know the movie?
Never heard of Bang the Drum Slowly.
So it's one of the first movies that Robert De Niro was in.
Really?
I'm sure people could laugh at that. And then I would say Field of Dreams. I think because Field of Dreams works on multiple levels. The Naturalist works on multiple levels. Both of those I think are incredible. I think 42 is incredible. The Jackie Robinson story. There's a lot of great movies. I don't know that I could pick any one as the best, but I'd say those are the ones that come to mind first. And of course, Bull Durham, which is hilarious.
Costner has a whole canon in baseball movies. I loved For Love of the Game.
He does.
For Love of the Game was good.
Another great movie. The Rookie. Another great $1 Million Arm. We could keep going.
I'll go watch Bang the Drum Slowly on the obvious heavy recommendation of Tom Rinaldi. What sport, in your estimation, outside of baseball, most lends itself to storytelling?
Oh, that's not even. I mean, you know the answer to this, Will. That is the most obvious, easy answer there is. Every sport is tied for fifth behind this one sport because it occupies the first four spots. Boxing.
Yes, I did know that would be the answer. And then, therefore, is the harder question, what's the best movie about boxing?
Oh, that's also very easy. That's Raging Bull. Now, you can make the case that it's not about boxing. Of course it is. For me, now, very biased. Born in Brooklyn, love De Niro, love Scorsese, love sort of the era that it captures. Love how the fight sequences are done, but there's so many boxing movies that are great, but Raging Bull is one of the greatest movies of all time.
Okay, so here's a question for you. There is no doubt, Tom, that while once baseball was America's pastime, America's passion is football. And there have been some stories told about football that have been successful. Any Given Sunday, it was a successful movie. But there's something about football that hasn't lent itself to the same kind of storytelling as boxing and baseball. And I'm gonna first try to sound out the reason. I'm gonna see what you have to say. On one hand, it's less personal. Baseball is an individual sport masquerading as a team sport, and boxing is an individual sport. Football is a group of men militarized behind helmets. I think that, I use that purposely, by the way. I think football and the military culturally and in terms of achieving success are very similar. But there are so many great movies, Tom, about military achievement. Why not with football?
I think there are some great movies about football. I don't know that you necessarily agree. I think We Are Marshall is a really moving and excellent movie. I think Remember the Titans is an outstanding movie. I think The Blind Side is a really good movie. I think there are a lot of very good movies about football. But I get it. I also think, Will, it's the verisimilitude, which is very, very difficult to capture on film in football. I mean, it's really hard. I would also say Everybody's All-American is an awesome movie about football too, with Quaid and with Jessica Lange, and that's another great movie too. So there are, I think, really good movies about football, but it's a very, very difficult sport to capture with authenticity.
Yeah, especially the game action. Exactly, with the game action.
And Friday Night Lights, obviously, is an all-time great show. So I realize that's different.
I never watched the show. I read the book. I watched the movie. I never watched the television show.
It's a great show. The book is amazing. Right. Buzz Bissinger, the book is amazing.
My nephew, by the way, is an Odessa Permian Panther as we speak, going into his senior year playing offensive line.
Wow.
Yeah. I will be going to Odessa this fall to watch one of his final games. He's committed to play at Clemson, and which was a little bit of a personal loss. You know, Texas had a few advantages going into this recruitment that I thought they would maintain, but the Longhorns lose out to Dabo. Specifically, I think, not just Dabo, but to the culture of Clemson. Okay, so you've got a busy schedule coming up. All right, you've got college football, you've got professional football, you've got you've got the U.S. Open coming up, and you've got the World Cup in the middle of the fall. I'm curious. You won't flounder on this question. You'll give me an honest answer. What most excites Tom Rinaldi? Like, what sporting event are you most excited as a fan? And I do this too, but not to your extent. And you lose a little bit of fandom. And you've been doing it longer than me, so I still have that lens. I remember Ryan Russillo used to say, I've been doing this so long, I can't really root for a team. I'm like, what's wrong with you? That's the only reason I love sports. I root for teams. And so standing on the side of Texas OU is one of the best experiences I've had. What are you looking forward to as an experience?
You're gonna get frustrated and unsatisfied with this answer, Will, right? What's the greatest sporting event? It's the next one. Because and the reason I give you that, Will, is because that's why we go and we watch and we cheer, because we don't know. Who knew that the Iron Bowl would produce the kick six? Who knew that when you go to the Rose Bowl, there's going to somehow incredibly turn out to be a double overtime game? Who knew that? And we could go on with the sort of the who knew or who could have expected that this game would have played out in this way. I will say this, Will, that there's football, to be on the sideline, to be opposite Erin Andrews, to have the chance to work a game every week. She's a master at that craft. I learned from her. To be a part of the Burkhardt Olsen crew now. It is just a real rush to be on the field and see the speed and the power. Yes. It's almost impossible to really capture on TV. In college, it's amazing to be a part of the spectacle of that, right? I mean, our Big Noon will be there for the Thursday game at Purdue, but then you fast forward, we have Bama at Texas. Will. I mean, you know, that's to be on the sideline for that is amazing. To be a part of Big Noon and be there, and for the first time, I'll do the World Cup, which I haven't had the opportunity ever to do before. The biggest event, not sporting event, the biggest event in the world. So I'm excited about that too.
So are you a soccer fan?
I am, but I'm having to study up quite a bit here. Not to the degree that certainly those on the team and those surrounding me.
I'm a big fan, and it's bad for my brand. People tell me you can't be a soccer fan, and I say I'm a fan of what I'm a fan. My sons play soccer, and I used to mock it, by the way. I used to any game that can end in a 0-0 tie, it's not a sport. And Tom, I love it. I absolutely love it now. I love the geometry of the game. I love watching, really, honestly, the geometry of how the ball is moved around to find an opening. It used to just look like chaos. It's not chaos. And it's chock full of characters, right? I mean, it is absolutely chock full of characters. One of the things that I really want to accomplish is taking my sons to England for a Premier League game. We'll have the World Cup here in America in a couple years, but I envy that experience for you coming up. That's going to be an awesome opportunity to cover the World Cup.
Sport works, I think, at its greatest pitch. You can also make this case that art works at its greatest pitch, Will, when it creates tension. When it is so powerful that it can take you sitting in your seat and physically tense your body. And I think soccer has an incredible ability to do that. It can be an excruciating exercise across 90 minutes in tension. When will a team break through? Can a team actually capitalize on this precious opportunity? How quickly does that opportunity flip as another team takes what had been a half where they're being dominated in their end and get that one opportunity and capitalize on it? I just think any sport that creates that tension in you, that's when it's working at its best.
Well, Tom Rinaldi, I hope I get to see you in a couple of days here with the Field of Dreams game between the Cubs and the Reds. I'm so happy we are again colleagues now at Fox. I hope I can have you back because there's so much more I would love to discuss, including, for example, the future of college football. What happens with super conferences? Who gets left out? How do we decide a national champion? And as we move into this NFL season, it's going to once again, obviously, as it always is, become a story of heroes and villains, and there's no better person to tell that than Tom Rinaldi. So I hope we can talk.
Well, I hope so. I just want to mention one thing, Will. We talk about stories and the stories that move us, and sometimes the stories that people don't know about. And we've had the opportunity at Fox Sports for the first time to tell an episodic story as a podcast. Fox Sports has never done this before, about the only Major League Baseball player who was murdered as an active player. And it's not ancient history. Happened to a terrific player named Lyman Bostock, who played for the Angels in 1978. It's a dive into his life, what he stood for, the path that brought him to the majors, and the absolute miscarriage of justice that happened in the wake of his murder that allowed his killer, in essence, to go free. We really hope people. It's called Wesley, and we've been blessed. It's been successful. It was #1 on the Apple podcast charts for a period of time. It's done really well, and we hope people will check it out anywhere you get your podcast. Sorry for the shameless plug, but we hope people will give Wesley a try. All 8 episodes now available.
I'm glad you brought it up, Tom, because I actually wanted to ask you about this. I was reading about this story of Lyman Bostock and his murderer. And, I spent some of our previous conversations sort of being introspective about my motivations. And I came across this quote from you. And you were looking back on your time with Outside the Lines when you, I think, originally began to tell this story at ESPN that has now turned into this episodic podcast here at Fox. And you confronted Lyman Wesley's murderer years later. And I don't know, and I don't mean this in any type of derogatory description, Tom. I don't know what better way to describe it. I believe it was not in... when you do what we do, you don't always get a sit-down interview. You don't always get the subject to say, yes, I will talk to you for an hour. So you have to sometimes, if it's very integral to the story and you think it worthwhile, you have to confront the subject. And it's often called an ambush-style interview, where they don't have a choice but to answer your questions. I think that's the confrontation you had with Lyman Bostock's murderer. And you had this quote where you were so introspective about this being one of the great regrets of your career. Why?
I did. I encountered the man, Leonard Smith, and this is captured in the later stages of the podcast and later episodes, Will, and I botched it. I mean, you framed it really well with a lot of economy. It was, somebody that we did not arrange to have a sit-down interview with. We'd reached out to and hadn't heard back from. We were surprised at how quickly he had showed up outside the address where we believe he lived. Incredibly, Will, can't make it up, 6.5 city blocks away from the intersection where he had murdered Lyman. That's where he lived, down the same city street. That's where Leonard Smith lived. And 30 years after he killed Lyman, that's where we encountered him. And with a cameraman on the other side of the street, me wearing a wireless mic, Leonard Smith in his early 60s pulls up in his car coming back from grocery shopping, and I was there to ask him. And I just, in essence, blew it. I was so surprised, and we described this encounter. You hear the audio, you hear what he said and what I said. I was so surprised, Will, at the shape of the man that emerged from that car. And I wasn't able quickly enough to process what I was seeing and get past his initial refusal to answer my first question. The point that I've wrestled with since then, and we revisit in the podcast, and I'd ask you this, Will, what value is there in asking a question, whether it's answered or not, in a variety of ways, to serve the audience, to perhaps in this case serve as a proxy for the family, which is never in any way heard from him, or just to serve this fact that this may be the only time you're ever going to get with this subject, and whether he answers or not, there's value in him facing those questions voiced aloud. The most obvious questions, Will. What guilt do you feel? Why haven't you ever expressed any remorse to the family? What have you learned about the man that you murdered? How often do you pass the intersection? I didn't ask any of those questions, Will. Zero.
What did you ask?
It's an abiding regret.
What did you ask?
I was so shaken by the shape he was in when he got out of the car. I was so shaken by what he looked like.
What was that as well? What did he look like?
And this is where I'll just tease. I hope people listen to the podcast, Will, because it's a full description and you hear the actual audio from those 14 years ago and what unfolded.
Oh, well.
Tease,
it's a wonderful tease. Now I want to know what he looked like and what you asked. And I will directly answer your question. I know what you mean, and I love that you asked those questions, and I love that you asked them out loud. Look, Tom, what's interesting about the state of journalism is I believe we're arriving at a moment of authenticity, and I mean that. What I mean is we have to own who we are. We as journalists, we as analysts, we as opinion makers. I think that objectivity is an aspiration. I don't think it's a status. And on the way to objectivity, I think we are best served by being honest with the audience about our biases and our successes and our failures. Because in the end, then you're an authentic human being. And authenticity is not all that is necessary, but definitely something that is necessary for trust. The audience needs to trust a journalist, and your willingness to look back at yourself and your own success and failure, and I would like to think for myself, my own biases, is something that is needed for the future of media. We don't get to hide behind the pretense of objectivity moving forward. We just don't. We have to be authentic to who we are. And so to answer your question, I think you say, okay, did I do that for me? Did I do that so that I'm part of the story? Did I do that to make myself look good? Why do you ask questions you know are not going to get answered? I actually think the answer to your question is there's value in seeing someone also decline to answer a question. If someone says...
Why? Well, why?
Because if you and I were talking, and we are talking right now, and you had asked me that question, will you answer this? And I ignore it, I am giving you in part an answer by ignoring it. I am saying something by saying nothing. If you and I or anyone listening were having a cocktail or a beer one night and we're talking in my living room or on my porch and you ask me something and I just don't answer, you're going to come away with some conclusion. You come away with some information there. And I think that's true in journalism and I think that's true in life. And therefore, his unwillingness to address your question says something of value.
And that's why giving voice to those questions that I didn't give voice to stays with me.
I understand that. I appreciate that. I appreciate you. And I'm glad. So check it out. I know it's at Fox. It's on podcast. It's also, by the way, on YouTube. So where can we go check out Wesley?
Right. So Wesley's available on Apple, on Spotify, everywhere that you would get your podcasts. Again, all episodes of the final 2 episodes came out just this week. All 8 episodes out now. Again, we've been fortunate with the reception, and we hope people discover it and learn a lot more about this remarkable man and player than how he died, as well as learning the change that was created in state law, the change that came in the wake of his death because of the miscarriage of justice that happened.
Tom Rinaldi, I can't wait until we talk again. Thank you, Tom. Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain Podcast for full episodes right now.